The fire crackled low in the hearth. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry wolf. A small wooden house in the dark. Inside, a family huddled, breath misting in the cold. Every creak of the floorboards, every rattle of the window panes. They were not listening for a storm. They were listening for footsteps. The heavy knock on the door. The constable had arrived. A knock that could shatter a life. A knock that could shatter a family. A knock that could shatter a future. A knock that meant someone had named them. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1692, to be named was to be ruined. A time of profound uncertainty. A simple accusation could mean you were a witch. This fear was real. It all began in the cold, confining winter of 1692. The setting was the parsonage of Salem Village, the home of Reverend Samuel Parris. Here, his 9-year-old daughter, Betty Parris, his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, began to exhibit strange and alarming behaviors. They contorted their bodies into unnatural positions. They screamed as if in terrible pain. They uttered strange, guttural sounds. They complained of being pinched by invisible forces. They complained of being pricked by invisible forces. They complained of being bitten by invisible forces. The local doctor, William Griggs, was called. He examined them and found no physical cause. He offered a chilling diagnosis. They were under an evil hand. The affliction was witchcraft. The news spread like wildfire through the small, tightly knit community. Under intense questioning, the afflicted girls finally named their tormentors. On February 29, 1692, arrest warrants were issued. The first was Tituba, the Parris family's enslaved servant from the Caribbean. The second was Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who often muttered to herself after being turned away from homes. The third was Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman embroiled in a property dispute and absent from church. These three women represented the lowest rungs of the social ladder in Salem Village. They were outsiders, easy targets for a community looking for a scapegoat. They fit the preconceived notion of what a witch might be. The initial examinations took place at the meeting house, which was packed with anxious spectators. The magistrates, John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, conducted the questioning. The afflicted girls were present, and their dramatic reactions dominated the proceedings. Whenever one of the accused women spoke or moved, the girls would shriek and contort, claiming they were being tormented by the woman's specter. The magistrates, far from being impartial judges, acted more like prosecutors. Their questions were leading and presumed guilt. "Why do you hurt these children?" Hathorne demanded. Not, "Did you hurt them?" With Tituba's confession, the crisis escalated. The key to this escalation was the court's acceptance of a particular type of evidence, spectral evidence. This was testimony from the afflicted girls that they had been harmed by the apparition, or specter, of the accused person. In the world of the Puritans, the body and the spirit were linked. They believed that the devil could not use a person's shape to afflict someone else without that person's permission. Therefore, if an afflicted girl claimed that Bridget Bishop's specter was pinching her, the court accepted this as proof that Bridget Bishop herself was a witch who had made a pact with the devil. This was a catastrophic legal standard. This concept placed the accused in an impossible situation. There was no alibi against the actions of an invisible double. The court proceedings were a spectacle of chaos. As the accusations multiplied and the jails filled, the local justice system was overwhelmed. To deal with the crisis, Governor William Phips established a special court of oyer and terminer to hear and determine in May 1692. He appointed 7 judges to preside over the trials led by Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton. Stoughton was a man of stern Puritan conviction, a Harvard-trained magistrate who firmly believed in the reality of the witch conspiracy. He had no legal training, nor did most of the other judges. Their mission was clear: to root out the evil that had infested their colony, and they were prepared to use the tools at their disposal to do so. The court convened in Salem Town on June 2, 1692. The first person to be tried was Bridget Bishop, a tavern keeper with a reputation for being flamboyant and living on the margins of Puritan propriety. She had been accused of witchcraft years before but had been acquitted. This time, she would not be so fortunate. The case against her was a blend of old gossip, reports of her puppets, dolls used for black magic, and, most damningly, the spectral testimony of the afflicted girls. Faced with the terrifying choice between confession and execution, some of the accused chose to confess. This was, a rational decision in an irrational system. The court operated under the belief that God would not allow a true witch to make a sincere confession. Therefore, those who confessed were seen as repentant and were spared execution. Their lives were saved, but they were expected to provide the court with more names, feeding the cycle of accusations. This tactic was highly effective. People like Deliverance Hobbs and her daughter Abigail Hobbs confessed, providing detailed accounts of witch meetings and implicating others, including John Proctor. However, many of the accused refused to confess to a crime they did not commit. They held fast to their innocence, even when it meant certain death. People like Rebecca Nurse, a respected 71-year-old matriarch, and John Proctor, a prosperous and outspoken farmer, denied the charges to the very end. Proctor had been skeptical of the proceedings from the start, calling the afflicted girls jades and wenches. His skepticism made him a target. When his servant, Mary Warren, one of the afflicted, began to have fits. Among the many tragic stories of Salem, none is more harrowing or bizarre than that of Giles Corey. He was an 81-year-old farmer, known for his stubbornness, known for his litigious nature. When the witch hunt began, Giles and his third wife, Martha, initially seemed to believe in the proceedings. Martha Corey had voiced skepticism about the afflicted girls' testimonies, a dangerous opinion to hold in 1692. In March, she was accused of witchcraft and arrested. Initially, Giles Corey himself may have believed the accusations against his wife, but as the hysteria grew and he saw more and more of his neighbors imprisoned, his perspective seemed to shift. In April, he too was accused. He was arrested and brought before the magistrates. Giles Corey made a fateful decision. He refused to enter a plea. He would not say guilty or not guilty. Under English law at the time, a person who refused to plead could not be tried. By refusing to plead, he could not be legally convicted. According to legend, Corey's only response was to gasp, "More weight." By the autumn of 1692, the witch hunt had spiraled out of control. The accusations, which had started with outcasts, were now being leveled against some of the most prominent and well-respected citizens in Massachusetts. Accusations reached as far as Boston, targeting wealthy merchants, targeting ministers, targeting even Lady Mary Phipps, the wife of the governor himself. This overreach was a critical turning point. When the accusers began to point fingers at the elite, influential men who had previously supported the trials began to have serious doubts. The constant executions, the sorrow of the divided communities, and the sheer number of people in jail, over 200 by the end, started to weigh on the colony's conscience. The harvest was being neglected as people were either in jail, in hiding, or attending the endless trials. A growing number of people began to question the validity of spectral evidence. Led by figures like Thomas Brattle, a Boston merchant, and Increase Mather, the president of Harvard, a powerful intellectual counter-movement emerged, arguing that the court had made a terrible mistake. In October 1692, Governor Phipps finally intervened. Spurred on by the criticism and perhaps by the accusation against his own wife, he ordered a halt to the proceedings of the Court of Oyer and Terminer. He issued a proclamation forbidding further arrests and disbanded the court. He then established a new Superior Court of Judicature to handle the remaining cases in the following year. Crucially, this new court was instructed by the governor not to admit spectral evidence as a primary basis for conviction. The new trials in 1693 resulted in a few more convictions, but Governor Phipps quickly pardoned them, along with everyone still held in jail on witchcraft charges. The Great Salem Witch Hunt was over. In the years following the trials, Massachusetts slowly began to reckon with its actions. In 1697, the General Court ordered a day of public fasting and prayer, a tacit admission of wrongdoing. Samuel Sewall, one of the judges, stood up in his Boston church and publicly confessed his blame and shame, asking for forgiveness from God and the community. In 1711, the colony passed a bill formally reversing convictions and offered some financial compensation to survivors and their families. It acknowledged a terrible injustice, though little comfort for those whose lives were destroyed. The Salem Witch Trials are a stark, enduring lesson about abandoning reason for fear. The events were fueled by social stress, religious extremism, a flawed legal process. A community under pressure found a scapegoat, targeting the vulnerable and different. The legal system, by accepting flimsy spectral evidence, failed to protect the innocent. Due process matters, the right to counsel, the right to an impartial jury, and being innocent until proven guilty on verifiable facts. In homes, from Salem town to the outlying farms of Salem village, we often simplify this story. But to understand the trials is to understand human nature. It's a story about fear. It's a story about faith. It's a story about the deadly consequences of a community turning on itself. How could neighbors accuse neighbors? How could a court send 19 people to the gallows on whispers and visions? Not merely a relic of superstition, a reminder of the fragility of justice, the terrifying speed at which reason can unravel under pressure. To grasp it, peel back the layers of time. Look at the people, not figures in a book. Farmers, ministers, servants, landowners. A world where the devil felt as real as the neighbor next door. Faith as shield, faith as weapon. In cold, dark months, beliefs and hidden tensions explode, a firestorm of accusations, consuming a small, isolated world, leaving a permanent scar on the American conscience. Understanding this history is not academic. It's a vital lesson in civics and humanity, the dangers of mass hysteria, the critical importance of due process. From the first strange afflictions in a minister's house to the final sorrowful apologies years later, we can see the path from suspicion to tragedy, a path we must recognize so we never walk it again. A cautionary tale, written in the ink of human suffering. 19 men and women had been hanged on Gallows Hill. One man, Giles Corey, had been pressed to death for refusing to enter a plea. Several others died in the squalid conditions of the jail. The list of the executed included people from all walks of life. Ministers like George Burroughs, landowners like John Proctor, and pious grandmothers like Rebecca Nurse. The story teaches critical thinking and the courage to question authority. We must challenge popular belief, demand evidence, and speak out against injustice. Today, we remember the victims not as witches, but as casualties of a failure of justice and humanity. Their story is a timeless cautionary tale. We honor the victims by remembering their names and heeding their lesson.